There we go.
Hey, welcome everybody. And we are doing a webinar today. We have some very special guests. We're talking about immigration, and we have had here at Transworld historically a pipeline of people that have immigrated from the UK to Southern Florida, mostly Central Florida. And so that is now in flux due to the COVID crisis and due to all kinds of things. So we have three experts with us today. We have our partner, Henry Ziff, from our London office, as well as the master franchise for the UK. We, of course, have our top producer here in Central Florida, Michael Shea, an overall worldwide social media leader for buying and selling businesses. And we have Lisa Khan, immigration attorney, specialist, and we're going to hear from each one of them today. And I think you'll get a lot of information about this. So Michael or Henry, you want to take it away?
Yeah, so thanks so much, Andy, for having us all on today. Today we wanted to talk about how people can move from the UK and the rest of Europe to the US, and what are the kind of different elements of how that works. So I suppose have some questions for Mike and Lisa, and was going to start with you, Lisa. What are the kind of different types of visas people can get and should be looking at?
Okay, so the immigration system in the U.S. is pretty complex. It largely, though, falls into business immigration and family immigration. So sometimes, I always explore all the possibilities. Sometimes someone's able to come to the U.S. based on a family relationship, but generally it's through business or employment. We've got a variety of different visas. For folks that are looking to move to the U.S. and potentially invest in a business, buy a business, the E2 investor visa is a very common visa. There's other visa types. I can touch on them briefly. There's an H-1B visa, which is for specialty occupation workers. You have to have a job offer in the U.S., an employer who sponsors, and a job that requires a degree, and a degree for that visa. There's very specialized visas for athletes, entertainers, religious workers, of course, student visas, that sort of thing. But the ones that are very common that we see a lot in this context, particularly for the UK, is the E2 investor visa, and sometimes the L1 visa. The L1 is an intra-company transferee visa, generally designed for multinational executives and managers. The L1A, I think, was originally designed really for large multinational corporations to be able to transfer high-level personnel, executives and managers from a foreign location to a U.S. branch or parent or subsidiary. It can work on a smaller scale sometimes, where you might have a potential client who has a large business or a good-sized business, say in the UK, and holds an executive or managerial role there, and is now going to be setting up a new company or buying a business in the US, and we can show the connection between the foreign entity and the US entity and have them transfer over. Tricky thing with the L1, though, is that to convince immigration that one is really an executive or a manager, they love to see subordinate staff. So it doesn't work well when someone's buying a smaller business, or might be buying a very good business or spending a lot of money, but it's just not staff intensive. The L1s as well are getting tougher and tougher. Immigration really seems to be scrutinizing those cases. So I don't see as many of those as I do the E2. The E2, as I mentioned, it's a treaty investor visa. We have to have a treaty in place between the US and one's country of citizenship. We have a treaty with the UK. For that visa, we need to show that an individual is making a substantial investment into a U.S. business. It has to be a business or commercial enterprise, can't just be a second home. We need to show that they're coming to direct and develop that business, and that the business is not marginal or has the ability to be non-marginal within a 5-year time frame. So that's in a nutshell, and I can elaborate on that.
That's fantastic, Lisa. And I suppose just drilling into a couple of those points on the E2 visa, because that's the most common one we see. What are there specific requirements in there? Is there a kind of a minimum investment? Is there a maximum investment? Is there a minimum number of people in the business, a maximum number of people in the business? What are the specifics?
Sure, good question. And I hear sometimes from people saying, oh, I've heard that you have to have at least, $150,000 investment and 3 full-time US workers. There is no bright line rule like that. There's no set number as far as the investment goes or the number of employees. The way it works is essentially to show a substantial investment the U.S. government, and here it's generally the embassy, the State Department at the consulate in London. They're going to be looking at what is the value of the business, and then is the investor putting in a substantial investment relative to the value of the business. So let's say that someone wants to buy a business that's selling for $150,000. Let's say it's a pool cleaning company, for example, selling for $150,000. Ostensibly, that's the value or the worth of the business. Substantial investment generally is putting in 75% or more of the value. So if you have an investor that says, look, my maximum budget's $130,000, but I found a business for $150,000, the seller's willing to finance $20,000, will enter into a promissory note and make payments on that $20,000 over the next year or two. That's fine, because $130,000 relative to the value of $150,000 is a substantial amount. So that's kind of the rule of thumb. Either kind of an all cash, putting in 100% of the value or the purchase price of a business, or at least 75% of the value of the business. If most of the businesses we see are in this, more small to mid-size range, 100,000, 150, maybe 200,000. If someone's investing in a business of a higher value, let's say it's selling for 800,000, then there's a little bit of a sliding scale. An investor could, the initial investment could be as low as say 50%. So they might say, I'm putting in 400,000 cash, buying a business for 800,000. So that's kind of how that works on substantial. The other component, really the key component, is they would like to see that the business is not marginal or can be a non-marginal business within a 5-year time frame. A marginal business really is one that's not producing enough income through either salary or profit to be able to sustain the investor and his or her family, and isn't necessarily creating jobs for others. So a good E2 case is going to be a business that can support the investor and their family financially, even if they don't need to live off the business. Maybe they're independently wealthy or they have other sources of income. We still need to show that this business could sustain the investor. And they'd like to see some job creation. That can be part-time employees, full-time employees. It can be direct employees. It can be subcontractors. So you might have in that pool cleaning company example, it might be a husband-wife coming in with 2 children. They're going to run the business together, and they have 2 or 3 subcontractors to help with the work. That would be fine.
Awesome. Okay, that makes, I think, complete sense. And a question for Mike: what typical types of businesses do you see buyers looking to acquire? And maybe for everyone, what are the types of businesses people can buy?
Yeah, good question. So it can be anything. We've done visas on restaurants, manufacturing firms, internet businesses. One of the conversations that needs to be had with a principal coming in from out of the country is the dynamics and the realities of their status in the United States in terms of things like credit rating and what the cost of living. So they tend to fixate on getting the visa, and I always tell them, look, get with the right lawyer. It's really not that big of a deal. I mean, we have to do it right. We have to know all the moving parts, but they need to be aware of, hey, when you come into the United States, you're starting from scratch from a credit standpoint. So landlords are going to treat you differently. How much is it going to cost you to set up your household? What is the cash flow of the business? So what you'll end up seeing, if that dynamic is understood, the initial, unless the buyer is completely liquid and has a ton of money, and their living expenses are, standard, not like $100,000 a year, a month or something like that, they will orient towards businesses that generate cash flow really, really quickly. So, if you were to walk around Orlando and go to the lawn guys, the pool guys, and Lisa brings up the pool guy, they orient to those types of businesses that have really fast cash flow. Because if you're coming into the States with 0 credit rating, the importance of having ready cash is monumentally important. So you can't afford to wait 30 to 45 days to get your receivables unless you've got a really strong reserve position. So when we sit down and do that consult, we're going, okay, how much do you have? How much do you have in reserve? What's your living standard? And we kind of mesh that together and go, okay, these are the types of businesses that are going to help you get through that. That's often an eye-opener. Lisa and I just had a conversation with someone Friday. Actually, I talked to him Friday. I think she talked to him yesterday, where that kind of came to pass, along with some other stuff. But knowing how the cash flow works is real important, and understanding how important it is to establish credit in the States pushes them towards the service sector. So pool, lawn, cleaning, businesses with really, really low overhead. I'll be closing tomorrow on a business where a landlord is asking for 6 months deposit in addition to the capital outlay on a $120,000 business. Landlords will treat people differently due to their status. So that stuff is often forgotten about in the process.
That's really interesting, Mike. And go for it, Lisa.
Oh, I just wanted to chime in real quick and say that what I really like about working with Mike and with Transworld is what Mike just said. You know, he's looking at the big picture. He's looking at not just trying to sell a business for the highest price, but really making sure that this is going to work for the individual. And I really respect, I think, the ethical standard of Transworld and its brokers, and it makes it so much better, you know, to work with folks like that, and it's great for your clients.
Yeah, I think that every business sale, the cash, the numbers definitely have to work. Just kind of going back to one of the points you touched on, Mike, with the landlords. What other kind of, you know, landlords, banks, sellers? What are their perspectives of international buyers? How do they find them? Are they good? Are they better? Do they get higher prices, lower prices? What do you guys find?
So in terms of prices, there are certain things that, you know, if you're an expat coming from any country in the world, you're not familiar with some of the accounting practices in the United States. You're overwhelmed first by the visa, and then you're overwhelmed by trying to determine tax returns, right? And okay, what's an S Corp? What's a C Corp? What's pass-through income? How do I draw a salary? That is, you know, this is why we're doing videos like this, is to give them some resources so they can get, it's a fire hose of information. So landlords, that ebbs and flows with the economy. So, you know, the one we just referenced, that's an L1 buyer. He has no status. Lisa's not his attorney. His attorney's telling him to buy the business beforehand. By the way, that's a whole nother podcast. That's probably not the right way to do it. But he's adamant about doing that. And because he doesn't have status, the landlord's going, what's my assurances? So the landlord's bumping up the deposit. And then there'll be a crawl back on the back end that we've negotiated once his status is in play, and we'll deal with it. The landlords in the larger plazas are, in a good economy, are less friendly to deal with. I imagine over the next year and a half, 2 years, I'm not going to have a lot of problems with landlords. So, you know, we can push them around a little bit, because a tenant is a tenant in a time like now. 3 years ago, I think we could Andy and I could sit here and go through the deal board for the last year and a half and tell you that up until COVID, we were having real problems with some landlords starting to over leverage and kill transactions. One of the important things about working with active brokers in the market is their credibility helps you negotiate better positioning with the landlords, because, you know, in 16 years, I've probably touched every property in the city of Orlando, or somebody in my firm has. So there's relationships to educate the landlord. And that's part of the dynamic. They don't walk in these circles, so they don't understand. Oddly enough, to get that 6 month down, to get that lease signed, I actually had to send a video of Lisa talking about immigration to him and his counsel. So they're like, oh, this isn't a broker trying to push the deal. Here's real counsel, you know, stating the facts totally objectively, and you know, what is status, what is an L1, what is an E2, and that helped us get through that transaction. So it's just part of the negotiation process, but the buyers need to be cognizant that that's an issue. Along with residential landlords are going to treat them the same way. So when you're looking at that pool of money, reconcile against how much you need to make, there's discretionary dollars that need to be put aside into a bucket just to get positioned, which pushes people back to, hey, I'm going to go to the service sector and run a business from home, as opposed to tying up capital in, you know, a landlord's pocket.
Okay, that's fantastic. And I suppose moving back to Lisa, probably, I suppose, and this is kind of one of my favorite topics, is what's the process? Like, what is the official way to, best practice way to do it? And what are some of those kind of tips and tricks to do and also avoid?
Okay, so I always say, I think for starters, before anybody really starts actively looking at businesses or making offers, they better be aware of the visa issues, the pros and cons. Is the E2 the right visa for them? What are the issues with regard to family, children, employment for spouses? What are they getting into? The E-2 is not a green card. It's not permanent residence. So I think the most important thing from the get-go is to get good legal advice. It doesn't have to be me, but I think it's so important that someone works with a good immigration attorney and understands the ins and outs of the process, and not just the short term getting the visa, but what the visa means, for the long haul. So that, I think, is really the kind of the first step. And then I usually will say that, the next and probably the most important thing after that is finding the right business. Because once an individual finds the right business, then everything else starts to fall into place as far as what we can do putting together the visa application. So much of the documentation required for the E-2 is going to be about the business, and that's where Mike or a business broker comes into play as a liaison with the seller, so that we can get things like tax returns and W-2s, 1099s for employees, etc. From the investor, we're going to have to show the paper trail of the funds that are being invested. So we have to show that the investment monies are from a lawful source. It's often money that's in a bank account overseas that maybe is from the sale of a property or accumulated savings. We typically, will kind of show that paper trail. Funds have to be invested in the sense that they are out of the control of the investor. So just having the money to buy the business and having the funds sitting in an account is not enough to get the E-2 or even to apply. Got to show that the investor has parted with the funds. Typically, that's going to be transferring the funds to the U.S. to an escrow account, and a business attorney will typically hold the investment funds in escrow with a escrow agreement and a contingency clause in the purchase contract that the deal is contingent on the visa being approved and issued. And if that's the case, then the closing moves forward, the funds go out of escrow, go to the seller. But God forbid there's a problem with the visa, then that contingency clause allows the investor to have a way out, so that they don't end up buying a business that they can't legally run. And Mark kind of alluded to that too. Sometimes people buy the business first and then say, now let's file for the visa. And I think that's a bit of a risky venture unless someone's prepared to have that business, visa or no visa. I've got a checklist I always provide to clients from the get-go of the types of things that are needed. But it's, proof of the funds. They've got to free up the funds. Sometimes we talk to people that are interested in moving to the U.S., want to buy a business, but they don't have the funds yet because they first have to sell their house. So it can be a little tricky. To juggle the moving parts. They may have to sell the home first to free up the funds to be able to legitimately make an offer and start moving forward on a visa, a business purchase and a visa application. Want to make sure individuals have their passport up to date, because we need to have a valid passport. Sometimes passports are expiring, and it's a good time then for people to go ahead and renew their passport, update their passport. We need to have a resume, birth certificates, marriage certificates for family, those sorts of things. The E-2 application, once it's completely prepared, and it consists of a form called a DS-160, which is the visa application, another form DS-156E for the E-2s, a qualifying letter that we draft for the embassy, and then all the supporting documents that go with the E-2 to show substantial investment. This is the nature of the business. I'm coming to direct and develop. I'm capable of doing so, all of that. That whole package, when it's complete, gets scanned and then emailed to the embassy. There's a special e-visa unit. The London embassy has never, despite COVID and everything happening, they've never stopped accepting the E-2 visa applications. What has stopped, though, is the visa appointments and interviews and issuance. Okay. So as of March 20th, they were no longer doing any visa applications, really kind of worldwide, and that hasn't resumed yet. We are waiting to see when that's going to open up, and it's going to depend, in large part, what are the conditions locally before each consulate makes a decision whether they're going to reopen and resume visa processing. So that's a tricky thing now, because E-2 cases that we filed in February, March, April, May are ostensibly having been reviewed and maybe interview ready, but kind of sitting there waiting for the consulate to be able to interview again. And that is making things at the moment a little bit difficult for planning, for sure.
Sure. So what you're really saying is, if you're really keen to do this, get your application in and get as high up the pile as possible.
I think there's merit to that. It's hard for everybody, with the COVID situation to really, plan for the future. And I think the best we can do is move in the direction that we want to, knowing that it's not going to be like this forever. and take the steps that we can and what we can control, and have to work around what we can't control. But certainly, the sooner an application gets in, the sooner it's going to get to the top of the pile and interviewed once everything resumes and kind of gets back to some normalcy.
Okay, fantastic. Mike, Andy, do you guys have any kind of businesses that you're kind of going, these would be great for an E2 visa buyer today?
You want me to take that, Andy?
Yeah, go ahead.
Andy sits at 10,000 feet. So
yeah. Mike's on the street, so.
Yeah. So part of like when we take a listing is, knowing the marketplace and knowing that there's buyer pool is we pre-qual is probably a strong word, but I think I've done 200 of these in 16 years. I can kind of look at it and go, yeah, I'm getting this through, or no, I'm not. I am not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV, but I've done enough of them that I know what Lisa's requirements are. I kind of describe it like, Lisa's checklist is on my Google Drive, and I know what she's going to ask for. And when I look at a business from a listing appointment, I'm going yes or no pretty quick. And then vice versa, when we meet with the buyer, we do that interview and go, are you married? Believe it or not, we get folks coming in from the UK who sometimes have been together for 20 years, aren't married. I'm going, okay, here's the implication of that. Now that's 2 visas, right? And oh, by the way, you're married twice, 2 different people. We got to fix that. That's a real one that happened. So, when you work with people long enough, you kind of know what the requirements are, how the winds are blowing in the embassy. And then we know what the requirements for due diligence are. So when I take that listing, I basically say, look, there's, in my mind, I'm deciding this is probably a visa deal. I'm going to start gathering up all that data. So when the contract goes in, Lisa gets a Dropbox, and the majority of stuff that can be provided by the seller for her needs to process the packet is in place. And she's got that, she's moving through it. I'm chasing the due diligence requests like we would in any deal for the buyer. A lot of the documents are the same. Copies of business licenses, tax returns, bank statements, a QuickBooks file to produce the P&Ls. And on the other tail, we'll also group in certain accountants and CPAs in the city who have done these just as much as Lisa has, because they know how to prepare the business plans. And that a requisite, not necessarily needed, but when we have something that's kind of marginal, the business plan may push it over the edge. So it's kind of like the broker plays quarterback, and we're handing stuff back and forth. And I talk to Lisa more now on Zoom than I probably have talked to her in 10 years. But it's very transactional when you know how people behave and what they want and what their expectations are. And conversely, even with the closing attorney, there's a closing attorney in town who prepares the statement for the escrow deposit, and it's automatic. It goes off to Lisa, and things are real smooth. The buyer is kind of overwhelmed by it all. They're like, how do we know all these people are doing what they're supposed to be doing? And as I always tell buyers, interview your brokers, make sure they're competent, interview your lawyers, make sure they're competent, and then let them do their jobs and, supervise them. But they should be copying these people. We tend to copy the buyer on every communication. So they see this stuff moving back. More often than not, they don't know what's going on, but it's intended to say, hey, it's fully transparent, but we're meeting all the needs. And, I may be speaking out of turn for Lisa, but I think the brokers in my office tend to, because we do so many immigration transactions, we try and communicate and answer questions within the scope of our practice that we can, so they're not bugging Lisa all the time, because she's actually producing a product, right? The deck is not small. And we have to be cognizant of her time so that she can get this thing out the door as quick as possible and into the queue. So we, if we ever get to a line where we think it gets sketchy, we'll communicate with Lisa and Lisa will answer. But a lot of the stuff is routine. It just doesn't seem so when you're contemplating moving around the world. It's scary. And there's a lot more considerations from a family standpoint that have to be managed as well. But we have a ton of, if you go into our website, you're going to see, there's a mechanism where we queue it up as being visa qualifiable.
Okay, fantastic. Do you want to, where is that, Mike?
Well, you can go to the Transworld site. You can go to my site. You can go to the BBF site. All the brokers in Florida cooperate, which is a subtle difference between how brokerage is done in the UK. So it's not just our stuff. It's, you know, all, I don't know, there's 4,000 businesses in the MLS in Florida approximately. And my guess about 20 to 25% are qualifiable, you know, just purely on their merits. But then you have to match it up to the lifestyle, geography, cash flow, you know, family dynamics. And that list gets down to a pretty manageable number. We usually are presenting people 4 to 5.
And I just wanted to, you know, outline that there's something very unique here for a buyer in the UK, is the ability to meet with people on both sides of the pond who really care about what's going to, you know, happen and make sure they follow the right process. So for them to be able to meet with you or your team in the UK, Henry, and then be passed off to Mike as an expert in the area of Central Florida, which most of them would gravitate toward. Of course, we have offices throughout the state of Florida. And then have an expert like Lisa that obviously has been able to circumvent and circumnavigate all these, not certainly circumvent, but circumnavigate, you know, this complicated process. It's truly unique. I mean, that's why we're doing this today, because this kind of, you know, this pipeline now that we have someone on both sides ready to help people, it's a unique model.
Yeah, I want to weigh in a little bit on that. I've always been nervous, and I've done probably a dozen deals where I've never met the buyer till they arrived in country and they're showing up at the closing. We did Skype calls. I did a call Friday night with another broker's buyer. They're buying one of my businesses. The broker didn't show up to the call. The guy knew nothing. And I spent 2 hours with him that night answering his questions and, you know, dispelling the myths. Because what happens, Henry, they go into these chat rooms. There's like these little, you know, dark web entities. And when Lisa was referring to the rumors and the myths and the minimums and the maxes. And I'm like, I can tell you probably back in 7 and 8, I would call Andy up and go, I am so tired of fighting off rumors and myths. And it's like I'm battling, you know, ghosts from, you know, 2005. And, you know, this has been a blessing because now we're able to distribute this. And when we got you guys over there, someone can actually talk, meet, press the flesh within social distancing confines. And because it scares the heck out of me that people are moving around the world without knowing who they're dealing with. And they do that with lawyers too. They place blind faith in attorneys they've never met, not on their merits or their performance, oftentimes just because they have the right nationality. And that's kind of a dirty little secret that, you know, we were referring to the abuses of the L1s. And I mean, I'll tell you a story. I had a family who came to me from Ireland, and they picked me because of my name. And their attorney was Irish. And that attorney for an E2 was trying to charge them $25,000 for one thing. Yeah, Lisa went, holy crap. And I went, holy crap. And I said, why did you pick this person? And we stopped it. I mean, I basically made a phone call and said, you're out of line. I've never done that. But you should be picking your business partners and your advisors based upon their performance, not on something as top line as, you know, they're from your country. It's helpful and it's natural, but the results and the outcomes that get delivered really matter. They really do. And if you look in the chat rooms of where things get screwed up, it's usually along those lines of, oh, I picked the wrong professional to push the deal through. I've got a guy from South Africa who I just met with, who tried to get an L1 on a maid service, you know, with 6 employees. And I just looked at him and said, that's not ever going to happen. And he's having to go back. And he's having to have lost all that investment. He bought the business beforehand. He never should have lost that money. It should have been stopped in its tracks before he ever made the attempt.
Another thing I see, which always surprises me too, is when individuals will work with a visa consultant and rather than an attorney. And as an attorney regulated by the Florida bar, consultants can kind of just hang up a shingle. There is an attraction, I think, for some people to the idea of a one-stop shop. And there are some folks out there that will say, look, I'll sell you the business. I got somebody in my office that'll do the visa for you. Somebody else that'll help you buy the house. And it may feel convenient to have that one stop. I can go to one place, but I think you're oftentimes getting somebody that sees the dollar signs and wants to have their fingers in all the different potential transactions. And that's often where we see a lot of problems because they're not getting the best broker, the best attorney, the best anything for that matter.
Yeah, we have someone in town who's a CPA doing visas and is a business broker. And to the folks in the UK, they're not going to understand the licensure barriers that exist between those three. You can't be a CPA, which is a fiduciary, be a business broker as a transaction broker. It's almost like you got three hats, and you're putting one on every time you move from room to room. You know, I'll meet you in this room as a business broker. You know, this little box up here in tic-tac-toe, and then I'm going to get out, walk you over to my CPA office, put a different hat on. The idea that you can wear multiple hats in this transaction is laughable and dangerous. And you know, they're honest through non-disclosure. They don't tell you about it, and the buyer doesn't know to ask the question because it's not their world. So, you know, it's like
Andy always talks about it. You know, when you're buying a business, when you're selling a business, it's about the team and who you have on your team. And yeah, absolutely. At Transworld, we are a team, which is why this works. Have we missed anything, Mike and Lisa?
Well, I could talk all day about visas, but I don't want to necessarily do that. I think one of the things that maybe we didn't touch on that people are often interested in is what happens after the interview. How long does it take to get the visa? How long is the visa valid? So typically after a visa interview, the embassy will generally let the individuals know, hey, the visa's approved, and then it takes about 4 to 5 business days to get the passport back with the actual visa in it. The visa, I always say, think of the visa as a travel document. The maximum time you can get an E2 visa for UK citizens is 5 years. Generally, the embassy is pretty good about issuing 5 years. Sometimes they'll issue a visa for 2 or 3 if perhaps it's a little bit of a marginal business, or maybe it's a brand new venture. They're starting from scratch and it's based on a business plan and it's not a proven entity. Those are a little bit harder to get through, I think, or at least to get the full 5 years. When you have that visa in hand, then you're able to come to the US, and when you come through Customs and Border Protection at the airport, they admit in E2 status. The admission date is in 2-year increments, which is kind of interesting. So 5-year visa, if you think of the visa as a travel document, while that visa is valid, individuals can come and go in and out of the US, but each time they're admitted, it's a 2-year duration. So it's important for folks coming in on an E2 to be aware of those differences. The admission record that gives them the 2-year admission, that controls their lawful stay, not the visa. So after or before the 2-year expiration, they either need to take a trip out and refresh and extend their 2-year stay, or in some instances, you can also file an extension request with immigration, but it's usually done by travel.
Okay. Yeah, and, you know, the visa, I'm not poo-pooing the complexity of it. It's complex, but when they buy, you know, that's just the beginning. You know, they call 2 people. They call Lisa, and then they call me. And then I sit and go, okay, here's all the stuff we got to do to get to closing, right? Because they got to get over here. They got to get their business licenses set up. They have to, if they haven't already, you know, got their business bank account, they have to get that done. Yep. They have to, you know, start standing in the queue. Where do I go get my business license? Different counties have different rules. There's, you know, how do I enroll my kid in school? How do I get health care? You know, how do I get my insurance? So, you know, again, that fire hose, you know, I tell people, look, let's bite this off one piece at a time. There'll be 10 to 15 days before we close. You're going to be working when you're here. Where do I get a car? You're not financing a car. So literally, you know, we've got guys who have car lots and who we worked with and go, okay, pick up the phone. This is where you go get X, right? Do you need a minivan? This is, you know, this is how and this network that we've established after 40 years in business is what helps these guys get over the end. And, you know, our last step in the selling process or the buying process is we're there after the close. We're there after the close. I'm not going anywhere. You know, when people buy a pool company, okay, Mike, there was a guy in my driveway the other day who bought a company from me. He cuts my grass. The guy who cleans my pool. The carpet guy I use, you know, bought the company from me 7 years ago. And they have common questions and they ask questions, and because they don't know how to, you know, deal with employees or, yep. You know, and we point them in the right direction to the networks that we have to help them get through their problems. And, you know, also a sounding board, because you're alone. you're alone, you know, and you know, you come from the UK, biggest question we always deal with families in particular is healthcare. And that's complicated enough. So kind of lay out the options, here's your pick, and hold their hand through that. Now that's not our world, but we've got the professionals who help them and go talk them through the judgment, because it's some scary stuff when you're moving your family around the world. We take it real seriously, the visas. And there are brokers who do visas, and there are brokers who won't, because of that after effect that's you know, an element of it.
Okay, fantastic. Mike, Lisa, what's the best way to get in touch with you guys?
My website is lisavisa.com. So that's easy to remember. And it's got all my contact details there. My email is always probably the best way to reach me. And that's lisa@lisavisa.com.
Yeah, and I'm on Twitter, mshea403. My email is mike@tworld.com. My cell phone, 321-287-0344. What is my cell phone? 321-287-0349. And then the website, tworld.com/Michael Shea. You know, that's it.
Cool.
And Henry, how?
I was going to say, Mike, any other social media handles?
Yeah, I got like, it doesn't matter. Just go. They're everywhere. And don't laugh. They work. So let's not question the, you know, the methodology.
And for us in London, it's henry@tworlduk.com or our website, tworlduk.com, or our office number, which is 0203-911-1059.
Yeah, and Henry, I'd like to point out that, like, as you're distributing this out and someone watches this, let's hope they get to the end, right? And they're in the UK or they're in Ireland, you know, up the Republic, and they want to immigrate. Get in touch with you, and you and I and Lisa can do these types of calls, or I can, because I'm real sensitive to her time, because she's actually doing stuff. And we can kind of educate them up, put the information, walk them through the process, because sometimes it takes a couple of years for them to kind of build it up, right? We got to give them this information, and we'd encourage people who see this to share it, so that, you know, we can dispel some of the myths that exist.
I think that sums it up, is that it's a process. It takes time. And even just for a family to get ready to move, we can start talking to you literally years before you make the big decision. So get in touch with us sooner than later. Of course, it's an interesting world right now that we're all navigating, and even more reason why you need people on both sides of the Atlantic to get things done. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I think this was really informative.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Andy. Have a great rest of your days.
All right, you as well.